Overharvest is again when humans are deliberately trying to get a species from the wild and we're getting too much and the population is not able to survive. In some cases, we've decided we don't like something and try to get rid of it, and we're sometimes successful. For example, Carolina parakeet was a native parrot living in eastern North America, the northernmost native parrot. But parrots like to eat fruit. People like to eat fruit. There was competition, and so you had a lot of shooting of the parakeets to keep them from eating fruit crops. And the species became extinct. You also have overhunting, whether there are no rules or the rules are not being followed or the rules are not good enough. Today, we see this especially with fisheries. There's quite a lot of overharvest of fishes. This includes inadequate reporting. Being a fishery inspector out on board a boat can be kind of dangerous if they do not like you. There's a lot of ocean they can throw you in. So enforcing fishing rules can be quite challenging, and also often the fishing rules are not as strong as they should be to actually protect the species. And of course, a number of countries do not really have the resources to enforce rules very well. We have significant problems with ships, say, from Western countries or from China or Japan going to waters belonging to, say, African countries and harvesting all the fish and leaving the country there kind of stuck. Now, maybe they're actually paying the country some, and the country's desperate for money, so there's a little bit of exchange. Sometimes it's just grabbing it because they can get away with it. For example, Somalia. Government is barely managing to keep parts of the country from being overrun by the terrorists that dominate other parts of the country. It's not particularly able to regulate fisheries. So, ships from other countries are able to come in and harvest all the fish, which means local fishermen are not finding fish. Okay, what do I do? How can I make a living? Well, let's see, I've got a boat, and I've got guns. Arr! We'll be pirates. And piracy is now a problem in that area to a large extent because of the fishermen not being able to catch fish. Again, if you catch or cut down or whatever you do to it, all of them, there's none left. Yeah, seems obvious. Not something that a lot of people, whether it's the politicians or the folks doing the harvesting, seem to be thinking about. There's this kind of delusion that there's going to always be more over the next hill when you take all the ones that are here. No. Conservation biology. This is studying human impact on organisms and trying to find ways to protect biological diversity. One major point that we've found out from studying conservation biology is that typically a single large area provides better protection than several smaller areas. Also, it's more effective to try to preserve an ecosystem rather than individually piecemeal trying to preserve one species here and this species there and that sort of thing. What can we try to do? We may be able to preserve an area naturally, establishing parks and reserves and things like that, in situ, in place. But also, In some cases, we may need to raise things, say in zoos or other special places, botanical gardens, things like that, to be able to preserve species where their habitat has problems, and then hopefully in the long run be able to release things back into the wild at some point. So maintaining rare species in zoos, storing seeds, things like that. Some parts of the world have greater diversity and particular concern for conservation than others. These have been referred to as biodiversity hotspots. Total represent somewhat smaller part of the earth, but a large proportion of endemic species. Now, focusing on these hotspots kind of neglects the whole ecosystem in some cases, and the general importance of ecosystems. Ecosystems do a lot for us. They help to filter air and water, give us cleaner conditions. There are important natural products that we may obtain from ecosystems. Going outside, enjoying nature, can be something that we enjoy, good for mental, spiritual health, things like that. Hunting, fishing, things like that. Having good natural areas maintains the population so that we can have a sustainable, well-managed harvest of these various species. Another thing is that these hotspot identification is very much biased towards groups that are well studied, which tends to be big land animals and some types of plants. So, for example, this is a map of some hotspots identified largely for land organisms. If we wanted a hotspot for the highest diversity of freshwater things, we have one right in our part of the world. The highest diversity of salamanders, for example, is in the southern Appalachians, in the mountains like Smokies area, here western North Carolina into Tennessee, that part of the world. For freshwater clams and snails, basically kind of from the Ohio River down through Alabama, over through Texas, Missouri area. We have some unique things over here on the Atlantic side, they're not as many. And this isn't focused on the ocean things either. So, identification of hotspots, that does help identify, okay, these are certain areas that are particularly high in species. Providing some protection there is valuable, but different groups have different concentrations, and this approach does risk the, oh great, there are no hotspots, we can just destroy all of Canada. No, there's important stuff living all around the world. We need to think about conservation not just in these smaller areas. Here's a photo of an experiment designed to test the effects of fragmentation. You see we've got the larger forest out here and different size squares. And what you can do in this situation is study for a while, see, okay, what lived there before the trees were cut down, and over time, how does that change? This was done extensively, for example, with building the Panama Canal. What used to be a hill became an island in a lake. So now it's disconnected from the surroundings, and there have been long-term studies to see what types of birds used to be there that have disappeared, or monkeys or other types of species. So we can see that when an area is too small, it does not support the same diversity that a larger area of natural habitat would. Restoration ecology, trying to take some place that's been damaged and build it back to a better condition. And there's some success here. We can try to do things like remove invasive species, to plant native plants, control erosion, improve conditions, and try to restore a more natural setting. Places disrupted, say, by farming, by mining, other activities, bringing this back more to a natural condition. Again, restore to what? What's our goal? Do we think back to 1800? Do we try to aim for 1600? Of course, the further back we go, the more challenging it is. We don't have detailed records to look at. And increasingly we need to rely, rather than written records, on physical evidence of what types of species might be around, looking at fossils, say, things like that. All the way back to before humans? Well, there are some ways we might do this. A popular idea related to this is that of rewilding, at least a popular one to talk about, trying to reestablish what things were like naturally, say, before humans arrived in an area. Well, there's a challenge. A lot of species are extinct. What could we do? So you've got some folks saying, hey, we should try to make out in the Great Plains be like what it was before humans got there, with mastodons and saber-tooths and giant bison and whatnot running around. Yeah, we don't have those anymore, so well, we'll just grab some African elephants and some tigers and whatnot and put them out there. And it's the middle of nowhere. There's not really enough people to worry about there anyway. Obviously, there are a number of problems with that sort of idea. One, African elephants and Asian tigers are not what the species were before humans. Two, there are people who live in Kansas and places like that. So, yeah, some of the suggestions are a little strange, but things to think about. What would be good goals? With DNA technology, we are approaching the point where we might actually be able to get DNA from extinct things and clone them and actually have wild ones again. How practical is that? Is it worthwhile? Lots of questions, lots of ideas. Not much too tangible in terms of definitive facts going on with a lot of these things. This is a table listing the endangered and threatened species officially recognized by the U.S. government. From the textbook, it was for 2008. I've got a link to the up to the last time the government updated things website if you're interested in how the numbers have changed over the past few years. And so we see various groups. Now, these have a lot to do with what people paid attention to. There are probably a lot more of some of the less conspicuous things, like in the snails and clams, crayfish, things like that. And who knows about stuff like flatworms? Has anybody looked? There's some types of earthworms that people have not found very often. Are they endangered? Are they just people haven't been looking at them? Not very well known. So these are the official government recognition rather than necessarily actually matching the need, whether it's things that, well, actually they're kind of doing okay now, or things that should be on the list that aren't. There are also international agreements. For example, CITES is a major international agreement saying that you're not allowed to trade in endangered species. There are strict rules, especially against exporting or importing things. And so it's something important to keep in mind if you do travel internationally. You need to think carefully about what's being offered as souvenirs. Sometimes those are not going to be things legal. For example, when I was in Venezuela, I saw some things for sale that I would have had quite a chat with the customs folks if I had tried buying that and bringing it back into the U.S. No, would not have been a good idea. Convention on Biological Diversity calls for nations to determine what they have, inventory the biodiversity, and develop national conservation strategies for managing and preserving biological diversity. Agreement, lots of countries have signed on, and not many countries have really done a whole lot of the actual implementation. Too often the bright idea of politicians is to pass rules saying that we're going to make a lot of rules to make it hard for doing research so that any profits are going to come to us. And biological research is not really the way to make huge profits typically. Now, true, there are potential eventual economic benefits, for example, identifying useful chemicals made by different organisms, or perhaps a useful species, and that could be used, say, a plant that turns out to have nice fruit or things like that. But a lot of it's giving information. Officially, the international treaty says that the countries are supposed to be making it easier to do research to help document things. That isn't something that seems to have gotten through to the politicians very well. On land, deforestation, a major problem. Large areas are being cleared each year without the plants and their roots holding sediment in. Much more is washing into the streams, into the rivers, and we have problems there. The mud covering, smothering, choking things in the water, making it murky, harder for photosynthesis, all sorts of problems there. Water, more of it's washing across the ground, less is soaked in the ground because it can go faster, there are less obstacles, and you don't have the plants taking water up from the ground to make room for more. So, changes the pattern of groundwater, of water flow. Trees, again, all that water that they're bringing up into the air contribute to clouds and rain. Cut down all the trees, and we can potentially lead to drier climates. Cutting down the trees, places become more desert, less shade, things like that. Classic example of this, when the Turkish Empire was ruling in Mideast region, somebody got a bright idea. Let's put a tax on landowners by saying you have to pay so much per tree. Okay, that gives your landowners a choice. Tax or axe. If I cut down my trees, I don't have to pay. Now, you don't have trees anymore, but you dodged the tax. That wasn't a good strategy. Also, in clearing, if we're burning the wood or promoting faster decay than would naturally happen, that's putting more carbon dioxide in the air, less that's stored away in the trees by photosynthesis, contributing to the problems of global warming and the like. Here's an example. You can see all this area where the trees have been cut down.